The golden rule of bodybuilding says you need 48 hours to recover, or your muscles will waste away. But biology tells a different story. What actually happens inside the sarcoplasm when you hit your delts every 24 hours? While bro science predicts injury, Olympic gymnasts prove that high-frequency loading creates the most developed shoulders on Earth. Today, we're dissecting the nucleus overload theory, the process of forcing extra nuclei into your muscle fibers to permanently raise your growth ceiling. But there's a specific threshold where growth turns into a tear, and most people cross it on day 3. Let's find that line. To understand why this works, we have to look past the muscle and into the sarcoplasm. Traditional damage and repair models demand 48 hours for fibers to knit back together. But here's the secret the textbooks rarely mention. Small muscle groups like the lateral deltoid don't always need a full structural rebuild. They thrive on frequent metabolic stress. When you hit your shoulders every 24 hours, you trigger nucleus overload. Muscle fibers have a protein synthesis limit dictated by their nuclei count. By providing a daily stimulus, you force satellite cells to fuse with your muscle fibers, physically adding new nuclei. You're essentially upgrading the hardware of your shoulders, permanently raising your genetic ceiling for growth. This is why a gymnast's shoulders look capped, even when they aren't pumped. Their muscle architecture has been fundamentally rewritten by daily frequency. But don't start grabbing the dumbbells just yet. If you apply this daily stimulus to the wrong exercise, you'll hit the day 3 wall, where growth stops and injury begins. Here is how to identify that threshold. Most people fail this challenge by day 3. Why? Because they treat every session like a max effort day. When you train shoulders daily, you aren't just taxing the muscle, you're redlining the rotator cuff and the subacromial bursa. On day 3, your systemic recovery begins to lag behind your local muscle recovery. This is the threshold. If you continue to use heavy, internally rotated movements, like the classic upright row or a flared elbow bench press, the growth signal is drowned out by inflammation. To bypass the day 3 crash, we use the stimulus to fatigue ratio. The goal of daily training isn't to tear the muscle fibers to shreds, it's to keep protein synthesis spiked without overloading the central nervous system. Think of it like a tan. You want 15 minutes of sun every day to bronze, not 4 hours on Sunday to burn. By day 4, if you've managed your SFR correctly, the soreness begins to transform into what we call a permanent pump. Your glycogen storage increases, and the nucleus overload we discussed earlier starts to manifest as actual density. But if you're still feeling joint stiffness rather than muscle fullness, you've already crossed the line. Now, let's look at the actual 7-day blueprint. This is the exact protocol you need to follow to ensure every session builds muscle instead of just grinding bone. To sustain 365 days of growth, you cannot train with 100% intensity every day. You need a 3-tier rotation that manages your recovery while keeping the growth signal on 24/7. This is how we trick the body into constant adaptation. Tier 1 is your anchor session. Once or twice a week, you hit heavy compound movements like the overhead press or seated dumbbell press. This provides the mechanical tension necessary for myofibrillar hypertrophy. This is the foundation, but it's also the most taxing on your CNS. Tier 2 is the stimulus day. These are your daily drivers. We focus on the lateral and posterior heads using movements like cable lateral raises or face pulls. Because these exercises have a low axial load, meaning they don't compress your spine, you can recover from them in less than 18 hours. Tier 3 is active recovery. On days when your joints feel stiff, that day 3 warning we talked about, you don't stop. You switch to high-rep, low-load band work. We call this capillary mapping. You're not trying to break the muscle down. You're forcing blood and nutrients into the area to accelerate the repair of the Tier 1 damage. This rotation keeps protein synthesis peaked without grinding your joints into the ground. But what happens at the end of the 30 days? Do the gains stay, or does your body crash back to baseline? Let's look at the day 30 verdict. If you followed the 3-tier protocol, you won't just see a temporary pump. You'll notice a structural change in your width from the side and front profiles. This is the nucleus overload taking effect. Your muscle cells have officially upgraded their capacity to hold glycogen and protein. But there is a catch. If you don't follow this specific exit strategy, 50% of these gains will vanish within a week of stopping. Because this is a high-frequency blast, your body is currently in a state of hyper-adaptation. To keep these gains permanent, you must transition into a consolidation phase. You don't go back to training shoulders once a week. Instead, you drop the frequency to 3 times a week, but increase the weight on your Tier 1 movements. This locks in the new nuclei you forced into the fibers. Training shoulders every day isn't a life sentence. It's a tool to break a plateau. It's the difference between having functional shoulders and having 3D delts that pop out of a t-shirt. Most people will watch this and do nothing. If you're actually committing to the 21-day nucleus overload phase, comment day 1 below.